It is Sunday, the 14th of February, 2016. That is St. Valentine's Day, 2016. And also what Unitarian Universalists would call Standing on the Side of Love Day, 2016, because they have reimagined St. Valentine's Day as Standing on the Side of Love Day, and essentially a day dedicated to standing on the side of love for, various oppressed people, as it were. It began standing on the side of love for GBLT people. Now the issue is more centered on the race and the Black Lives Matter movement and so on. Of course, it also falls in the middle of Black History Month. But it's interesting how Unitarian Universalists are incredibly averse to standing on the side of love for clergy misconduct victims of their own ministers, their own abusive ministers. Unitarian Universalists have been called upon to stand on the side of love for people who've been mistreated by Unitarian Universalist clergy. And basically they obstinately refuse to do so, and additionally, they place a huge emphasis on injustices outside of the Unitarian Church, make a big public show of standing up for people who are victims of injustices outside the Unitarian Universalist Church, but they actually do very little to deal with injustices that take place within the church. And perhaps a good example of that is the Black Lives Matter thing right now, because at the last UUAGA there was basically a motion made to support the Black Lives Matter movement, and with some contention and so on, it was adopted. Now there's absolutely, in my view, there's nothing wrong with standing on the side of love for people of color who have been oppressed for centuries in the United States, to say nothing of elsewhere. But what I find interesting is that some years earlier, UU Safety Net had called for a national conversation on clergy misconduct issues. UU Safety Net had said, we want a national conversation around Unitarian Universalist clergy misconduct issues to take place in the church so that these issues can be responsibly dealt with. UUA moderator Jim Key, actually before he was elected, signed on to this. It was a petition. He basically gave his support for this. And there has been some conversation, some discussion about Unitarian Universalist clergy misconduct. Some of it, unfortunately, containing highly misleading statements that seek to minimize and deny clergy misconduct. But the fact of the matter is, there's no comparison between how much time and energy is being devoted to discussing the Black Lives Matter issue and cause and the clergy misconduct. It's almost as if the UUA decided, let's jump on the Black Lives Matter issue so that we don't have to deal with clergy misconduct. So basically a way of saying, there's this much bigger injustice, and we're going to pour all our energy and time into, basically a lot of public posturing more than anything else about this issue, in a way that basically distracts people from thinking about the issue that UU Safety Net called for a national discussion of some years ago. Anyway, I just arrived at the Unitarian Church in Montreal. One more time, it's February 14th of 2016, and I noticed they changed their wayside pulpit, they call it. I call it the wayward pulpit, because basically often what's written on this wayside pulpit is completely out of alignment with how Unitarian Universalists actually behave. So let's read it. Reconciliation will not be one grand finite act. It will be a multitude of small acts and gestures played out between individuals, and it will be ongoing until all the wounds are healed. Can't read that, Edward something or other, Edward Gimmelin or something. So this is about reconciliation with the Aboriginal people of Canada. It's all about the Truth and Reconciliation movement for Canadian First Nations. So it's a kind of a similar dynamic. You know, the Unitarian Church of Montreal and other Unitarian churches, you know, who, in my view, probably didn't have a, you know, the Unitarian Church, you know, it may well have had some complicity in what happened in terms of the residential school system and so on, but it was really more the Catholic Church and Anglican Church and so on. You know, the Unitarian Church has always been tiny in Canada. I don't think there's never been more than 50 or so Unitarian churches in Canada. So I'd say their involvement in the residential school system and so on was absolutely minimal. Although I could be wrong about that. Who knows what actually happened? But the point here is it's a similar dynamic. They're talking about, you know, working towards reconciliation with First Nations people, which again, there's absolutely nothing wrong with, and it should be done. But all of these words here should apply equally to people who've been harmed by the Unitarian Universalist religious community, people who are victims of Unitarian Universalist clergy misconduct, whether that misconduct's of a sexual nature or a non-sexual nature. But Unitarian Universalists absolutely refuse to do this. They make zero small acts and gestures to try and work towards healing. Not at all. And in fact, they very often do incredibly stupid things that only make matters worse. So we're going to start marching back and forth with our picket signs here. But I just wanted to make that point is, you know, the Unitarian Universalists, they're really good at, you know, talking the talk of, you know, respect for the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, and a free and responsible search for truth and meaning and so on. But when it comes to their own injustices and abuses, that all goes out the door. You know, they not only refuse to live up to any of those principles, but they very often behave in a manner that outright violates them, you know, totally betrays them. So a black van there seemed to have a flasher. Looks like a perhaps unmarked police vehicle. I don't know what that's all about. I also heard some sirens in the background. I expect it has nothing to do with my protest, but you never know. I've had so many interventions with the police that who knows, you know, maybe they're going to come and have a little chat with me. Oh, it doesn't really look like it in that the car headed up a street a block away. But, you know, this is an example of how Unitarian Universalists, you know, make a total mockery of this business of, you know, working towards reconciliation, you know, with a multitude of small acts and gestures. You know, the multitude of small acts and gestures that I have had here while protesting is a multitude of basically completely unjustified police interventions, amongst others. I've also been physically assaulted by Unitarian Universalists. Not a whole lot of cases, and they weren't like serious assaults. Probably, you know, one of the worst ones was where I was given a body check that knocked me right off my feet onto my butt in the snow, thanks to Margot Ellis, former president of the Unitarian Church of Montreal. That happened just over 2 years ago in January 4th of 2014, if I remember correctly. I've also been, you know, pushed around, shoved, grabbed. One of the earliest assaults against me was by a guy, Mr. Bennett. I'm trying to remember his first name. Off the top of my head, I can't remember his first. I think it might be Mark Bennett. Or no, it's Pierre Bennett. Pierre Bennett, that's right. He was, again, on the board of the church, and then very early in my protest, he didn't like the fact that I was, standing near the entrance of the church and demanded that I move. And I said, I think I have every right to be here. And he grabbed me by the shirt collar and, held it really tight, almost choking me, and held up his other hand in a balled up fist aimed right at my face, basically threatening to punch me right in the face. So again, they're not the worst assaults in the world. I got nothing more than scratches and bruises out of them. But these are not exactly small acts and gestures played out between individuals that lead towards healing of wounds. On the, quite the opposite, and that's the point I want to make. It's the exact opposite of that. It's actually small acts and gestures that seek to create more wounds, not less. It's got nothing to do with healing and everything to do with causing more damage. And then coming back to the police interventions, I lost count of how many times the police have come to the church, thanks to calls made by Unitarian Universalists demanding the police find a way to get rid of me, often calling in completely false information to the police. My protest is very peaceful. I just walk back and forth with picket signs. I may occasionally say a thing or two. I may occasionally shout a little bit, mainly just if I'm saying something to someone who's, 20, 30, 40 feet away. I just raise my voice loud enough so they can hear what I'm saying. I don't go around chanting slogans and stuff. I could do that. I could even go get a megaphone and say all kinds of stuff. But I generally do what I'm doing right now, which is just walk back and forth with picket signs and narrate what's going on. So anyhow, this is one of the gentlemen that has seen my protest many, many times. Didn't see any small gesture of reconciliation coming from him. He just marched right by with a stony face, which is one of the small gestures that is very common with Montreal Unitarians. Good day, sir.
Mouvement Action Justice?
Pardon?
Es-tu toujours à Mouvement Action
Pas
Justice?
vraiment,
Ok.
pas depuis un couple d'années.
Ça marche encore un peu, ça? À ta connaissance?
Peut-être encore un peu, je ne sais pas vraiment. Je vais peut-être les recontacter, mais...
T'as pas trouvé une autre lutte plus punchée un peu à faire dans la vie avec tous tes talents? Ça, c'est fini, ça?
Non, c'est pas fini,
Non?
c'est loin d'être fini.
Moi, je respecte beaucoup ceux qui font des luttes.
Quoi?
Ne me mêle pas de celle-là, je serais en conflit d'intérêt.
Conflit d'intérêt, ça c'est une bonne excuse pour faire rien. Non. Vous êtes le champion de justice, mais vous êtes avec...
Je suis pas ça, pantoute. Tu lis
Non.
pas l'itinéraire, c'est moi aussi.
OK, non, mais quand même, vous êtes associé avec...
Tu lis-tu l'itinéraire des fois?
Des fois.
Parce que moi aussi, mon histoire est dedans.
OK, je vais regarder
Tu vas
ça.
voir que je suis pas assez-
Mais si vous êtes membre de cette église-là, ou si vous êtes membre de la communauté Unitarian Universaliste,
Je suis plus membre, mais je les aime bien. Là.
OK. Mais vous êtes affilié, associé.
Affilié à ça. Ben, ils nous aident peut-être, on va voir,
Bon.
je sais pas.
Mais-
Mais une
mais-
église comme un autre sont loin d'être parfaites, les églises. C'est moi qui ai dit.
Ah, mais ça, c'est loin d'être parfait.
Ben,
Ça, c'est une autre diminution de qu'est-ce qui se passe. Ça, c'est ce qu'on appelle en anglais minimization.
Moi, je suis pas
Alors, vous êtes complice. Vous êtes complice avec eux. So that was Yves Monceau, who once upon a time was one of the, I believe, founding members or early members of what's called Mouvement Action Justice, which is interesting because Mouvement Action Justice is a group that deals with police brutality, police abuse of power, and so on. And I was involved with them for some time as a result of all of the stuff that was happening here with the church. I wanted to file a police ethics commission complaint against a SPVM detective who basically behaved badly, and I felt he deserved to be brought before the police ethics commission. So that was my second actually involvement with Mouvement Action Justice, and the one that sort of brought me into the organization. Previous to that, I'd had picket signs confiscated and destroyed by a couple of overly authoritarian SPVM police officers, so that had brought me into contact with Mouvement Action Justice about a decade ago, now that I think about it, I think in 2005. But there was some misunderstanding, miscommunication, and although I should have filed a complaint against those officers, I missed the deadline for doing so, and so that didn't happen. Anyway, you know, there's Yves Monceau, a guy who basically presents himself as a champion of justice and rights and so on, and yet he's essentially complicit with what the church is doing. Everything he said, you know, minimized. You know, nobody's perfect. You know, other churches, blah blah blah. You know, basically just minimized the seriousness of what's going on here. Now, I'm not saying it's not the most serious injustice in the world, but we're talking both non-sexual and sexual clergy misconduct. We're talking, in some cases, about pedophilia and rape committed by Unitarian Universalist ministers, and then the Unitarian Universalist religious community trying to cover up and hide those sex crimes with legal bullying. And the crazy thing too is, you know, in my case, you know, I blogged about a couple of Unitarian Universalists who were actually convicted of such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape and were sentenced to jail terms. And yet, the Unitarian Universalist Association wants to keep that hidden. And so what do? They have me served with the cease and desist demand letter that falsely accuses me of the criminal act of blasphemous libel for allegedly, and I do say allegedly, making unfounded and vicious allegations to the affected ministers of the association engaged in such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape,